Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, bringing you all another Market Watch episode. So today we're taking a look at some of the most notable cards that are being reprinted in Magnificent Mavens. Of course, as you guys have seen from the reveals, Mavens is going to be an amazing set, probably the best set that we get all year, bringing with it some awesome new cards as well as some much needed reprints that will make the game much more affordable and accessible to newer players. With the upcoming reprints though, we have to try to keep in mind how they will affect the prices of the existing printings of those cards, as well as try to reason out where the prices of those original printings and the upcoming reprints will settle once the set officially drops. So that's what we're going to try and do today. Let's get started. The first one here is interesting. We have Infinite Impermanence. So Impermanence is a modern day staple that just seems like it's going to see play forever. In my mind, it is right up there with Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, being one of those cards that may fall out of favor every now and then, but for the most part, it's something that's going to see play in every single format. And this reprint is coming at a really interesting time. For a while, the cheapest version of this card was around like $15 to $20, but then the card got a super rare printing from a structure deck as well as a gold rare printing, and those brought it right down to around the $10 mark. However, this additional ultra rare printing is one that should finally bring it down a bit further, at least initially. We should all expect a ton of Magnificent Mavens to be opened, which should saturate the market with even more copies of this card than before. I do think, however, that it is staple enough that it won't ever be less than $5, but I do think that this printing is enough to push it just over the edge and bring it down to around the $7 to $8 mark. Now, assuming that it doesn't get a reprint too soon after, I could see it coming back up to 10, maybe even a little bit higher with enough time. However, I do think that this printing is something that is going to hurt the value of the Structure Deck Super and Gold Rare printing. So if you were holding on to a lot of copies of either version, this reprint is probably going to hurt your investment in the short term just a little bit. It should ultimately be okay in the long term overall, assuming it doesn't get like a rare printing in a side set or something crazy like that, but it's definitely worth noting that this ultra rare printing coming in Mavens will pull down with it the prices of the lower rarity alternatives that were already on the market. Next up, we have Triple Tactics Talent. This is an interesting one. Ever since its release, the amount of play that this card has seen has fluctuated pretty wildly. So despite how big hand traps have been and how it feels like everyone is playing them, there are times where Triple Tactics Talent is amazing, functioning like a free pot of greed, but there's also other times where the card just feels kind of dead, like it isn't really going to help with anything. The timing of the reprint of this card though is actually pretty great. Triple Tactics Talent has been seeing an uptick in play over the last couple of months, with Sprite being a very popular deck that can play a lot of hand traps in the main board, and it's one of the most popular decks of the format as well. For a while, we were seeing the ultra rare reprint of Triple Tactics Talent from last year's Megatins at just over the $20 mark, so around $22, $23. However, the card was starting to trend upwards to around $28 to $30 over the last couple of months. Now, however, with this reprint coming from what feels like out of nowhere, the card is back down to around $15 for either the 2022 Megatin version or the pre-sales of the Mavens printing on TCG Player. This is basically the price being chopped in half, which is great because Talents was one of those cards that's really good for some decks, but because of the price tag, people would always just look for cheaper alternatives since the card wasn't exactly necessary to have to use. Now, with the card being cheaper, that's definitely a huge improvement to the card's accessibility for the player base. Moving forward, I am expecting this card to fluctuate between $10 to $20 for either ultra rare printing, depending on how much play the card sees in any given format. Moving on, we have Appaloosa, Bow of the Goddess. Specifically, we are getting the alternate art version that was originally printed in Maximum Gold, and thank God we are getting it in a normal rarity that isn't the kind of ugly looking gold rare. I'm not saying that all of the gold rares were ugly, but honestly, Appaloosa wasn't a great choice for that printing in my opinion. I think it would have looked much nicer as a secret rare, but it also looks great as an ultra rare as well. Appaloosa is a card that pops up pretty often for different decks, usually as an end board piece that can provide multiple monster effect negations, especially if you have the ability in your deck to link off a Link 3 monster and then basically anything else. Now personally, I really like the original art secret rare printing. I think that looks the cleanest, though I do think my second favorite version is the ultra rare alternate art. Obviously not looking at the Starlight because of how expensive that is and how most people can't realistically pick one up. Now technically speaking, the ultra rare is the highest rarity printing for this alternate art. For now, either the gold rare or ultra rare version is going to run you about $10, which is honestly pretty reasonable. We do have to keep in mind that even though this card has a few printings, it hasn't yet had that like one printing that's going to make it super dirt cheap, and because of that, we should expect that this card will stay at around $10 minimum. Remember, up until this reprint was revealed, the alternate art gold rare and the original ultra rares were right at around the same price, between $15 to $20. So this reprint still has shaved off already a good chunk of the card's value. Personally, I think that at $10, the alternate art ultra rare version is a buy that will eventually go back up to between $15 and $20, while the gold rare version will remain cheapest as the budget, uglier alternative. Of course, this is assuming that the card doesn't see yet another reprint within the next few months. Up next is a card that I feel like has actually been printed a little bit too much, and it feels weird not just to say that like in general, but especially about this card in particular, Lightning Storm. So Lightning Storm is a card that I've always thought was kind of crazy, right? Not only can it clear all of your opponent's back row, but it also has the ability to instead potentially clear all of your opponent's face-up monsters, making this a very flexible side deck card that could be sided in a wide variety of matchups. Although this card did seem like a staple for a little bit of time, I feel like over the last while, the card has fallen off a bit. It just hasn't felt as impactful or devastating as other cards, and so people just played different things that could potentially do more. However, I think you can never really overlook a card that potentially allows you to generate significant card advantage so simply, and for casual players, this can be a great card that can instantly turn the game in their favor. This reprint definitely feels weird, given that we just had it reprinted in the 2022 Megatins. The Megatin secrets were already down at $20, and now they are potentially dropping lower than that to around like $15 to $17. Of course, this ultra rare printing in Magnificent Mavens is a lower rarity, but a lot of players still look at Lightning Storm as being like a more expensive chase type of card. Now between these two reprints though, this should ultimately bring the prices of the Mavens Ultra and the King's Court Ultra down to between $10 and $15, which is honestly super affordable for a card like this, especially where you used to have to pay like $100 for a single copy. So yeah, ultimately, because it's a different rarity and the secrets do look a lot nicer and they're noticeably different from the Ultras, I do think that the secrets from the Megatins will retain value a little bit better than these upcoming Ultra reprints. But honestly, I think that between the card's lack of competitive play and the number of reprints that the card has received in a relatively short amount of time, we can expect to see these lower rarity prices fall enough to where we can consider the card to be budget friendly at last. Alright, this is a card that's in an interesting place, Blackluster Soldier, Soldier of Chaos. So this is a Link monster from Battles of Legend Heroes Revenge that has a pretty volatile price history. It wasn't too hyped up at first, but then everyone realized that it was short printed and actually really good against Sky Strikers, and the card shot up to like $80, something crazy like that. Even after the card stopped seeing play though, it never really fell too much in price. Everyone remembered how impactful it could be, and that kept its price relatively high. And then it got reprinted, but those reprints came as a Ghost Rare and an Ultimate Rare, both higher rarity printings that didn't really improve the card's accessibility, and so the price was still high. And so this first printing comes up in Magnificent Mavens that actually increases the availability of the card, and it really shows that the majority of the reason for this card's crazy price was the fact that it was just so difficult to obtain. For right now, we have the secrets and ultimate rares down to $60 each on TCG Player, and then tentatively we have the ultra rare reprints pre-selling for $25 to $30. However, I do think that this is still way too high, especially given that this is a one-of card potentially in the extra deck, and even then it's not seeing very much play at all. Given the quantity of Magnificent Mavens that I think is going to be opened and flooding the market, I fully expect BLS Soldier of Chaos ultra rare printings to fall to around the $10 mark, given that it isn't seeing play and will be much more accessible now to your average player. Those other printings will probably retain a good chunk of their value as they are all higher rarities, but ultimately I think that with this reprint, people will no longer be struggling to beg people for this card if they want to run a copy in their extra deck. So this is going to be another interesting one, but I still think it's worth talking about. We have skill drain. So I didn't realize until like now when I was looking up the prices to record this, apparently Turbo Pack ultra rare skill drains are back down to $25 to $30 each, which really just like blows my mind, because right when it came back to 3, I sold a couple of copies for like $100 each. Anyways, skill drain going to 3 caused all the versions of the card to shoot up in price, to where even the commons and rares were going for around $15 each. And oddly enough, that's kind of where the price has stuck. Even though the Turbo Pack Ultras have fallen by around 70%, the commons and rares haven't really moved down in price that much. On top of that, we have the Lost Art Ultras, Hidden Arsenal Ultras, and dual terminal printings all within that $20 to $30 range, which isn't too far off from the prices of the commons and rares, despite being much nicer. However, what this tells me is that we should see a really big crash in the prices of a lot of these different versions of skill drain. Skill drain hasn't had as much of an impact on the meta as I think a lot of people were expecting. It's useful in some Eldritch variants, and I think tier limits are able to cite it as well, but even then it's not an amazing option because of how popular tier limits are. For right now, it looks like the pre-sales are listed at around $10 for this new ultra rare printing, which sounds about right. I think it could come down a little bit more to maybe $8, along with the price of the DT Ultra from Hidden Arsenal Chapter 1. However, I definitely expect that with this, the commons and rares for the most part should come down to around the $5 mark. Yes, they are older printings, but they're non-holos, and honestly to me it doesn't really make sense that the Turbo Pack Ultra version is $28 while the Battle Pack Rare is going to move for like $20. So yeah, overall really weird things going on with the current market prices of skill drain due to the card suddenly going to 3 but not seeing play, and then now seeing a couple of reprints. But expect a lot of things to be straightened out by this reprint, finally making the card very easily accessible to a lot of players. And finally, the last card we're going to take a look at for today is Evenly Matched. So this is a card that I'm really glad to see in Magnificent Mavens, despite it getting several reprints in the past. It's kind of odd, but somehow this thing's gotten multiple printings, but each of them is relatively hard to pull, and they've all been kind of spaced out quite far from one another. And this has actually kept the price of the card relatively high to where it's not yet a budget player friendly price. As we all know, Evenly Matched is a very popular side deck card that helps to clear opponents' boards. Not as simple as Lightning Storm, but because of that, it's actually much more effective at what it does. This is a card that has been a fairly consistent side deck card over the last few years. There are times where it falls out of favor, but it also always manages to find its way back into people's side decks. Just like with Triple Tactics Talent, this is a card that was actually starting to trend upwards in price up until the reprint was announced. Its two other ultra rare printings from Dual Power and Ghost from the Past were down in the low 20s, but they started moving up over the last couple of months and were approaching the $30 price tag. But now, of course, with this reprint, the prices of the ultras have gone back down to around 20, which makes sense given that all three of these printings are going to be ultras and none of them are the original printing of the card. For now, the pre-sale price of Evenly Matched from Magnificent Mavens on TCG Player is around $20, which I do think is a bit high. Each of those other ultras have initially brought the card's price down to at least $18 or so, so I expect that by the time more competitors are able to list their copies on TCG Player, we should see the pre-sales for the Magnificent Mavens versions come down to around the $12 to $14 mark, and with it should come down the prices of these other ultra rare versions as well. In the long run though, I could see the card rebounding back up in price a little bit higher, back to that $20 to $25 mark. But of course that will depend on the spacing and timing of upcoming reprints, as well as the card continuing its steady increase in usage. Alright guys, that is it for today's episode. Magnificent Mavens is definitely going to be one of the best sets of the entire year, probably the best one to be honest. And I'm really glad to see so many awesome cards getting reprinted. I think that it's really cool to see previously expensive cards become affordable, because it makes the game so much more accessible for a lot of newer players, and it helps to attract new players into the game, and just like overall grow your locals to be more competitive, which is better in the overall long term for everyone. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch and you're excited to see Magnificent Mavens drop in just a couple of weeks, please make sure that you let me know by slamming that thumbs up button for me. Also make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what you guys think about the cards that we talked about today, and also let me know what other cards are trending on the market so I can cover them in a future episode as well. Also, if you haven't already, do make sure that you hit that subscribe button to get all of the latest and greatest content from both Tombox and myself here on our channel. And until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.